Hi and welcome to the Mailbox. This is a weekly segment where I go through comments that people have left on videos, on Twitter, on Patreon, wherever you can leave comments for me really. And sometimes they're questions and I want to give a fuller answer than is easy to do in the place. Sometimes it's just a really interesting question or comment that I'd like to talk about in this sort of vodcast style. And the first one is I'm also going to have a request in this one. This was about the last sort of series lore video I did, which came out on Thursday on YouTube at Patreon last week. What I try to do is several times a month, mostly I try to do it every week where I can, is produce a video specifically to put on Patreon early as a benefit for the people who support my channel on Patreon. And then it comes out on YouTube later on, so I'm not putting anything behind a paywall, is the way that one works. But the last one I did was on Frostmourne, the top 5 victims of Frostmourne, which is, you know, something I quite like to do. You know, for me, it's a nostalgia one. I really loved Warcraft 3. I love the storylines in it. I remember Warcraft 1 was a brilliant game. I absolutely loved that game. I played it for years. The story, there's not much to the storyline. Warcraft 2, better storyline, but I didn't like the game as much. Warcraft 3 for me is where it all came together. It was fantastic stories, fantastic gameplay, you know, and so I played that on and off all the way until World of Warcraft came out. I thought I was still playing Warcraft 3 actually when World of Warcraft came out. But, so yeah, I did that one and got this comment, well done, looking forward to more like this, and I'm thinking, oh, it's not part of a new series. That being said, it's not like, strictly speaking, a one-off. Don't expect another one this week, like on that sort of vein. It's the sort of thing I might do now and then. This is like a sort of stopgap between now and the next series. The next series for Patreon is supposed to be coming out today. Unfortunately, I've had a terrible headache. I've rammed a load of ibuprofen down my neck to do this. So that might be delayed today or tomorrow. I'm still going to try and get it done today, but it may be tomorrow or it may be later on because, yeah, my head is pounding. Well, it's all right now, actually, but I'm just drugged up with it. So, but yeah, if anyone has any ideas of similar ones they want to do, well, put the ideas down, and if I sort of get fired up by it, I'll absolutely do that. But in terms of a request, in terms of sort of videos that people have asked me to do on Patreon, one particular comment from someone a couple of weeks ago was about guidance videos on people moving from heroic to mythic raiding. Now, I did do a series a short while ago, which was called Preparing for the Tomb of Sargeras, and that actually was the intention. The intention was specifically for people to step up to a different level of progress, either from normal to heroic or heroic to mythic. But I think it was taken to be, you know, this is more for mythic raiders. When it wasn't. My focus is always when I don't do a lot of raid type guides. I certainly don't do a lot of boss guides. But in terms of general raid guidance, I do try and have in my mind the transition from heroic to mythic. But I have never been in a guild that progresses on heroic and takes a little time over that and then moves to mythic. So the guilds I've always been in, ever since this current model came in, which is you have your LFR, then you have your normal in heroic on your flexi, and then you have your mythic on your fixed size. That's that model which was created in Warlords of Draenor. I've only ever played the model whereby I do the normal in heroic in the week it comes out, and we finish that, and then do the mythic as soon as mythic's out on that second week. So the idea that, you know, you've got a guild which might take a month or so, or maybe even a little bit longer, but around about a month usually seems to be the way it is, to progress through heroic, and then they want to do mythic, but they maybe haven't got the roster to just move naturally and seamlessly into mythic. So what I did is I imagined what a lot of the barriers were and focused on the player when I did that series on Preparing for Tomb of Sargeras. So I was focusing on, and I was basing it on the sort of people that we will sometimes recruit in the guilds that I've recruited for, who are essentially people who have only really done heroic before and they wanted to step up to mythic. We always recruit a good number of those sort of diamonds in the rough, so to speak. And the sort of things I see that are common to them, the sort of things that they can easily improve on to get themselves up to mythic standard, is what I based that series on. But of course there will be other things as well. So if people wouldn't mind, as well as general comments on this video, if you are in or have been in Legion, I'm going to say Legion rather than WoD, because I think there's something significantly different about the heroic to mythic transition in Legion. There seems to be many more guilds making that transition, whereas in WoD, I sort of got the impression that most heroic guilds just were either unable or, you know, didn't really think it was worth the effort moving to Mythic. There were far fewer seemed to do it in WoD than Legion, so it's a different thing in Legion. But if you want to put down what you see as the main problems, if you've been in such a guild or you are in such a guild, what are the difficulties in transitioning from heroic to mythic in your view? And then what I might do, if we've got a decent number of those, I'll be able to do a video to address those specific concerns, because that might be something I'd quite like to do in the next week or two, especially as I've got 2 more weeks at work and then I've got a week off to be able to do a few more, you know, detailed videos. I shall be, for a start, working on my next Retribution Essentials guide, but also a few other more detailed guides in that time off as well. So on to the next question. Someone's suggesting here about the issue of class utility. Make any boss skills that require soaking bypass immunities. Leave the other abilities that are personal as they are. Now, my initial reaction to this comment is it's always a bit dissatisfying if an ability you have has to be like rendered useless on a particular fight. You know, it's a bit like, and you do get this quite a bit, like you'll get, for example, the stun on Mistress Sassine, you know, when you get too many Hydra shots, so it gives you a stun for half a minute. And even if you've got abilities that break you out of stuns, that won't work, because Blizzard need that ability to stop you cheesing it, basically. So, yeah, I've got, but it's always very unsatisfying when that happens. Well, I've got this ability, why can't I use it? But at the same time, you understand why Blizzard have rendered it useless. So, although my natural inclination with this comment is to go, it's not very satisfactory, is it? I'm starting to come to the view that actually probably this is a good thing to do, if I'm honest, because the problem is that where you have someone who can solo, a soak that's designed for multiple people to get into it, where you have a situation where someone can just solo it, you obviously make that fight a lot easier. Now, if it's the case that lots of classes have the ability to do that, then it's sort of okay. But the problem is then, I mean, Fallen Avatar is an extreme example of this, but you'd get this to lesser extents in lots of other fights as well. So you create, you identify the sort of mechanics that are actually quite tough to deal with in what you might think is the intended way, but you can have people who can solo them. So you want lots of those people in your roster. That generally leaves you a couple of people in a 20-man mythic roster who can be of a class of whatever. Like, for example, I killed Fallen Avatar this week with my guild. I hadn't really done the progress on it. Not that Rets can't do it, but we don't bring anything special. So you're occupying that 1 or 2 spots for people who just don't bring anything. So what we did, you know, and I didn't like the fight anyway. I still don't like the fight. And I didn't want to muscle my way in just because I'm an officer. So I sort of stayed out of progress on that one. But we killed it this week, so we moved our enhancement shaman out, who again doesn't bring anything, so that I could go in and get the kill. Again, so I'm occupied. I certainly didn't displace someone who brings something useful on that fight. I displaced someone who didn't. And that is the issue. So you could argue that, yeah, if Blizzard just take the view that, do you know what, this is causing a problem, we want people to soak them with multiple people and not these, make the immunities worthless for those. They have done similar things in the past, like Zul'Harak is the example I use. There was a soaking mechanic on Zul'Harak that my immunity didn't work for, so Rets couldn't soak it, solo soak it. Because actually being immune stopped you, so you had to take damage from it. Now, even that wouldn't work for Fallen Avatar, because the rogues often do take damage, it's just they feint it off. But if they make it so that damage reductions don't work on it and immunities don't work on it, then yes, you would create a situation where all of a sudden those classes that now can just cheese those mechanics are not absolutely essential. You create a situation much more like where you can bring the player along the class. I still don't think it's a very elegant solution, but I would now accept that it probably is a solution, and it's better than the status quo. It's better than what we have now. It's not what I would ideally like, but yeah, I think, you know, as the author says here, I think it would be better than we have now. Next comment. So if they're going to, this is something to do with legendaries. Let me think now. If they're going to insist on this, they need to take away the requirement to have all of the legendaries on a class. It should be all legendaries on one spec, with the account bound token drop rate increased to quickly unlock another class stroke spec. So this is about the token. Now, there's a bit of a hoo-ha about this. Obviously, there are some people arguing, I mean, as I'm sure Blizzard would be. I can well imagine the situation, for those who don't know, really, really quickly what this is. So in the next patch, 7.3.2, not 5, it's 0.2, there's going to be a new legendary token. So if you've got all the legendaries on your main class, and I mean class, not, spec, you can imagine the situation where you're doing all the content that rewards your legendaries, but you've no chance of getting a legendary because you've got them all. So as a consolation there, you could get a token that can be used on another character. So maybe you can pass it to an alt. And Blizzard have described it as future-proofing. So although they're bringing it in relatively soon, it's sort of intended to last for the rest of Legion. Legion may well be out for another year or probably just under. So there's a bit to go yet. And I can imagine from Blizzard's point, I've criticised it, and I can imagine from Blizzard's point of view, them going, what the hell, man, we're just putting something in for those players. What's the big deal? But from, not my point of view, but from a lot of people's point of view, what you do is you see content. It's like, here's a piece of content we're putting in the game that I can't access. That's where the problem always arises with this. So, I'm sure Blizzard are going, what the hell? This isn't, this is just for those people who've just done loads and loads. There is a way of making it useful for everyone, and that's my argument with this. There are some pieces of content that you will have to bring in for a much smaller number of players. Like, for example, when they put a lot of work into designing mythic raid bosses, they require much more effort than designing the encounters for the lower difficulties. And that's for a smaller number of players, although I'm going to do a video talking about the fact it might not be as small a proportion of the customer base as some people think, but that's for later on. So, they do this and we're sort of okay with it. But the thing is, everyone else can still access that if they wanted to. This is something that they can't. So what they were saying is here, so coming back to the comment, so if they're going to insist on they take away the requirement to have all other legendaries on a class, it should be a legendary on a spec. That, I think, possibly would be better. It's still only going to serve a few people. Because I think, again, where the problem is coming here is there's people at the moment know that they can get, like, for example, we've got a really, we've got someone in our guild who's our raid leader, actually. He just plays all the time. He just plays all the time. And he's just dinged a mage very recently. And he's already got that mage up to like 930 item level. In fact, that's what it was last night. God knows what it's on now. It's probably overtaken my main. And I'm sure his artifact power is also coming along very nicely as well. Because you can gear up very quickly now. You can get artifact power very quickly now. You can't get legendaries very quickly. I know there's the catch-up mechanic, but that still restricts you a bit. And that's the problem. So people have in their minds, we have a problem here that we don't get we can't catch up with legendaries at the same rate as we can with gear and AP. Because that's the thing. It's not we can't catch up legendaries as quickly as we would like, because you never gear up as quickly as you'd like. It's specifically you cannot catch up with legendaries as quickly as gear and AP. Then they announce this idea of legendary tokens. People will then naturally see this as, oh, this is a possible solution. But then they see how it's going to work. It's like, no, that's not going to help. Do you know what I mean? So that's, I think, where the issue is. And I think Blizzard need to consider those things. They need to think about it as, how are people going to take to this? They've done it well-intentioned. They've been very well-intentioned. They thought, we're bringing something out for the really hardcore players to help them out. And they probably don't understand why they're getting a load of stick for it. But you just need to think about these things. Think things through. It's a bit like giving your kids names, isn't it? You have to, when you've got a kid and you're giving it a name, you have to think to yourself, right, how can people bully themselves? Look at the name, look at the names together. Can the initials make up a rude word? Can, the name be shortened to something a bit of an insult? So you consider that carefully. Do you know what I saw this week? I had to point this out to the people in my office. I was looking at a board and it had pinned on it various invoices for laboratory equipment. And I looked at one of them, and it had an email of the contact at the company. And the email was pretty standard for a lot of companies. It was like the first initial dot surname at the name of the company.co.uk. And I'm not lying, by the way. You're not going to believe this. I don't know if I'm saying it, but it's true. Gospel truth. This name was Slaver. It was S.Laver. And I'm thinking, okay, it could be a married surname, fair enough, in which case, you know, the person in question has messed up there. But, you know, let's say it's not. Has someone actually named their kid with a surname Laver with a name beginning with S? That's just poor planning. And it's the same thing here. You have to think to yourself, how can people get annoyed by this idea? You know, we're doing it for really good reasons. How can people get annoyed by it? And then just see if you can do something to please more people. Instead of just, you know, not thinking about it at all. That's my opinion, though. All of these stuff is just opinion. Next one. So, the main part of this one is, do you think Blizzard has adopted a philosophy of trying to make things less alt-friendly to try and deter top-end guilds from multiple split runs? No, I don't. And actually, I don't think they're trying to make things alt-unfriendly. I actually think, through Legion, there's any number of cases you can make for where Blizzard have clearly tried to make things within their own parameters as alt-friendly as possible. I do believe when they say they try and make stuff as alt-friendly as possible, I believe them. I just think they overestimate how much time people need to spend on alts. Because obviously what they need is for us to be playing the game all the time. Or as much as we can afford with our leisure time. They don't want us playing other things, for example. They just want us playing this. And I think that's quite effectively in Legion. But I think they overestimate how much, you know, or underestimate maybe how much time it takes on one character, because there's plenty to do on just one character. Whenever I want to do something on an alt, I know there's stuff I could be doing on my main and probably should be doing. That's why I don't spend enough time on alts, or as much time on alts as I have done in previous expansions. Because, I mean, WoD was the alt expansion for me, because there was nothing to do. But even in previous expansions where there was enough to do on your main, I still played a decent amount on alts. I don't really in this expansion, even though I'm going to plan to make even more of them. So I don't think that. And also, it wouldn't work anyway. I know split runs is one of those things that no one wants. No one wants it. The people who do it, the people who don't do it, Blizzard themselves, no one wants it. But there isn't an elegant solution for it. And there is no way of deterring top guilds. Anything you might do to make alts more problematic is only going to deter the guilds who might do it if it's not too much hassle. It will never deter I mean, you've got to remember, these very top guilds will do half a dozen at least split runs, sometimes more. They'll do as many as they can. So the worst, or the best you could possibly hope to achieve if you made something very alt-unfriendly is to reduce the number of split runs they do, but you will not stop them doing split runs. And all you would do is, again, the knock-on effect would be, it would hit hardest, you know, the people much, much lower down. But I don't think they have a conscious decision to try and make things alt-unfriendly. I really don't. I think they try and make it alt-friendly where possible. And there was, as I say, there was a situation, that Q&A that Ian Hosakostas did, that convinced me. You know, I was thinking to myself, you know, it's about this issue of unlocking world quests on Argus, making them account-wide. And he came up with a very good reason for why not, because it causes conflicts, because you're supposed, different parts of the game sort of look differently. The zones sometimes physically change when you go through the storyline and where characters are and stuff like that. So massively account-wide, unlocking all that stuff, and then going through those quests on another character can cause conflict. So that was a perfectly good reason for something like that. And often they do have good reasons. But often I just think, as I say, they don't. Next one. Why do Blizzard insist on making us hate the legendary system? Again, I don't think that's their intention. It says, if you got one per week guaranteed, it will still be 3 months of subscription to gain all of one spec's legendary, unless Legion is going to continue for another 2 years now. I think it might continue for about another year, though. I think it's going to be next autumn, September to November-ish, when the next one comes out, judging by the fact it hasn't even been announced yet. But I absolutely take your point, and this is my argument as well, that, you know, even if you did guarantee people, you know, if they just did a basic, because my suggestion was to have a guaranteed legendary from the Mythic Plus cache. So all you have to do is do a Mythic Plus at whatever level, just enough for you to get the cache the following week, and you get a guaranteed legendary. And as you say that, and this is my argument, it would still take you a long old time to get all the legendaries for that character. And of course, because it's still RNG as to which one you get, you know, it could well take all those several months to get the ones you really want. So, and there's not that much time left to the game. If you think about it, they're not planning on bringing out any new legendaries, as far as can be told, in Legion. Even the legendary that we still don't have, because it's tied to Antorus, we just do a quest, we just complete Antorus and we get it. It's a quest. They're not even making that RNG, the new ring that's going to improve our Netherlight Crucible traits. So you get the impression that Blizzard have decided that we've reached the legendary saturation point now. So why are they making it? Why are they retaining this very, very long time that it takes to get them? And as you say there, and this is the real key point, yes, you're right. If you had a guaranteed one every week, it would take several months to get them all. But we don't have a guaranteed one every week. Now, yes, if people did every single raid, you know, and they did lots of Mythic Plus dungeons, at least one a day. They did emissary caches every day. They did the rares on Argus, because that has a chance to drop them. I think it does it on Broken Shore as well. I can't remember. But they did all the things that can drop it, and that would take you several hours of gameplay a day. And that's only if you did the raids on LFR even. What if you did it on different difficulties as well? At that point, you might get to the point where you are getting one a week. Maybe. I mean, think about what I do. I don't do a lot, by the way, but I will go through typically a good number of mythic bosses in Tomb of Sargeras every week, all of the heroic bosses in Tomb of Sargeras. I'll do a few mythic pluses. I don't do lots. I'll do my emissary caches. I'll do rares on Argus most days. I don't get one a week. I get one every 2 or 3 weeks is the rate at which I am getting them at the moment. So imagine someone doing even less than that. Because I do it, by some people's standards, a lot. By some people's standards, not a lot. And, yeah, you know, you think about the time it's actually going to take. Some people are not going to get them all on a character that they ding now before the end of Legion. There's no... I mean, they've even talked about, semi-seriously, they might do it, for the very last bit of Legion, you know, when we get the pre-expansion patch, they were talking about even just allowing us to wear unlimited legendaries. You know, not have this 2 legendary limit. Just let us go mad. So when you get to that point, for us to, you know, even though that might be 10 months away, 9 months away, for us at the moment to be in the situation where we still can't get them at a decent rate just seems to me a bit unnecessary. Unnecessary. And I know the reasoning. The reasoning is, even though they haven't said it, is bound to be, if we make it too easy, then that gives you less incentive to do all these bits of content. But again, I think they underestimate the motivation needed to do it. I think they've actually made really good content in Legion. A lot of content that can stand on its own 2 feet without the dangling carrot of legendaries and AP, some of it. And don't get me wrong, they are good carrots. But I think, you know, the legendaries especially, because they're orange. But, sorry, terrible. But, you know, I don't think they need... I think they overestimate just how much they're needed. Next one. Still would like to see space explorations, but in the case of another underwater zone, I would love to see them play with the ideas like light versus depth. Pressure, aka the bends. And lastly, add the concept of temperature, both extremes, hot and cold, thermal climates in clouds. What real-world effects would you like to see that get added to WoW as we move to bigger and larger? Well, this is the point, of course, that, you know, the tech, as other people have said as well, the tech gets better each expansion. The problem with those sort of things, you can look at them from a realism point of view, but also you'd look at it, they would just annoy people, I think. What I would like to see, if you know, if the tech, I mean, I know that there's going to be some tech that's going to wow us again. There is for every expansion. They do something new from a tech point of view every expansion. And I don't think they're going to disappoint us in the next expansion, but I just don't know what it is. What I would like to see is more interactivity with the terrain. And I think I've said this before. You know, I would like, you know, at the moment you get to a situation where you say come to a bit of a misshapen boulder, a big old boulder. And if you can't jump over it, you're not getting over it. You know, I would like to see a situation where we could start to do things like climb. You know, climb over things, or where we have the grappling like in Stormheim, but instead of having fixed hooks, that, you know, we can actually use a grapple gun to scale these surfaces and stuff like that as well. So that is what I would like, especially if we're having this situation where Blizzard want us to properly get around the world and appreciate the world pre-flying. We're going to have this 8 to 10 months of pre-flying. Have a situation where we can properly interact with the terrain. Now, I don't know how big a job that is. I'm not a game designer. But if they were going to do something big, that's what I would like to see them do, if I'm honest. That is what I'd like to do. That being said, if you come back to the underwater zone, I don't think they'll necessarily do anything with pressure as such, because, let's face facts, anything we're likely to have to do in that underwater zone is going to mean going down to the bottom. But I do expect it to have a different feel to Vashir. I think, you know, it's years later now. I don't like to think how many years later it is. I'm not even going to work it out. It must be about 7 or 8 years later. I don't know. It must be about that. Or by the time it comes out, should we say. So I think it will feel very, very differently, the underwater bit. I'm sure they will add something coming to that. Assuming there is even is one. I mean, but I think it's very, very likely, don't you? Next one, it says, blah, blah, blah. This was from the Tuesday talk. Where it says, well, MOP Heroics didn't need to be hard because they added challenge mode for those wanting difficult 5-man. The issue because I was talking about the fact that MOP Heroics were just level cap dungeons. What I was saying was, I wasn't saying that it was disappointing that the MOP Heroics weren't hard. What I was saying was that they weren't harder than the normal dungeons. Because all that happened in MOP, your normal dungeons were just the dungeons you could do while you were leveling. There was only a few of those. And then there were other dungeons you could do at level cap. And they just called them heroic, but they were no more difficult. If you look at WoD, for example, so WoD had normal and heroic dungeons. Now, obviously difficulty is comparative, isn't it? For me, the heroic dungeons on WoD, were not difficult. But they were more difficult than the normal ones. And that was my issue that I was trying to explain with the MOP Heroics, that they weren't any more difficult. They were exactly the same level of difficulty. They were just level cap ones that you couldn't do while you were leveling, that's all. So that was that, you know, just a little comment there. That was all I was talking about there. It's not the fact that they were hard. It was a comparative thing. They weren't harder than normal. Whereas the ones in WoD were harder than normal. Just like the ones in Legion. Again, heroic ones, they're certainly not hard now. I don't think they were ever hard. But they were harder than normal, is the key thing. But MOP was the one time when he had heroic dungeons that were no harder than the normal versions. Next one. I would love to know what their thinking process is. How does the development team reach an agreement on what to do next? What kind of system do they work with? I mean, obviously, I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows, apart from unless you work there. What I strongly suspect, though, having worked in places before, which not game design places, but still places, I think it probably works the same as any other place. It's not a democracy, and it's also, I think, a fallacy to assume that when a feature is brought out, that everyone at Blizzard is on board with it. There will be things that come out, by the way, where developers will have argued against it. Designers will have argued against it quite strongly. You know, ultimately, someone will make it. It's not a democracy. Someone will make a decision about which one they eventually go for, and then everyone does their best to deal with it. That's how, you know, a constructive team will work. You know, even when, you know, I mean, I've had this before when my bosses will say, well, we're doing it this way. I will turn around and go, no, that's a stupid thing to do because of this, blah, blah, blah. But if they put the foot down and go, no, we're doing it like this, then it's my job then to do my best to make it work, you know, to pick up that turd by the clean end. The same thing I'm quite sure happens there. You will have people who are more influential than others. You will have people who argue more forcefully than others. You'll have some people who will try and present their argument, but at the end of the day, when it comes, some people just don't like conflict. When it comes to conflict, they'll just sort of melt away and go, just do what you want then. And other people that will not let that bone go, and they'll keep hold of it. And probably those ones that are sort of more determined, even if they have the daftest ideas, will get their ideas eventually through, because people will just decide, bugger it, just let them do what they want. And there will be other ones who are just naturally more influential. But ultimately, I mean, the people who are more senior will be the ones who get to say, when all the arguments have been made, now we're going to do this. Which is why it is fair. Sometimes Blizzard moan, they talk about collective decisions and stuff like that. And they'll moan about getting nonsense for it. It is sometimes, I think, unfair when you just generally moan at Blizzard for particular decisions. Especially because you imagine what it's like where you have argued against something and then the whole community doesn't like it either, and then you feel that you're being attacked, you're tarred with the same brush as everyone else when you argued against it yourself. But I think the most senior ones are the ones who have no reason to complain. The senior developers have no reason to complain because ultimately no one forced them to become senior developers. They are in that position to accept responsibility for those decisions. But I strongly suspect it works like everywhere else. Next one, regarding the Mage Tower, it says their stance on those appearances you can't transmog later is the same as their original stance on Legion appearances. You can earn them and use them with your artifact, assuming you're wearing the artifact but can't transmog. And it says, now I don't think they've directly stated this about the Mage Tower, but they have said something like, you can obtain the appearances but can't transmog them unless you earn them in Legion. That would lead me to believe that they'll keep the Mage Tower active post-Legion. Possible. I think actually they've changed their mind. Well, I'm fairly sure they've changed their mind on certain things. So sometimes if you're going by what they've said some time ago, some things may have changed. Because I'm pretty sure at one particular time they did sort of say, they've always sort of said they were going to try and allow us to transmog the appearances that we got in Legion. That was always a thing. But there was a point at which they were saying quite early on that any appearances we didn't unlock during Legion, we wouldn't be able to unlock later on. Now they've gone back a little bit on that and they've said there's certain ones we won't be able to do. So we won't be able to do the plus 15 mythic. So we won't, if we haven't got the Mage Tower appearance by the time Legion is finished, then we won't be able to get it. Things like that. But there'll be other sources where we can get it and they'll just allow us to get that appearance. I suppose it's probably more effort to disable some types of appearance or getting them than it is just to leave it in the game and go, what the hell. But yeah, in terms of the Mage Tower, I don't know. They may well just put it on a timed rotation. That might well be suitable. Or, because what they've also talked about, potentially, they've never promised this, by the way. They've said what they might do at some point is just keep all the buildings active at all times. That would probably be the simplest thing to do. And I think that's probably, because they've talked about that as a possibility, that is, I would go with, that's probably what they would do, personally. And the last comment says, as far as the why isn't AP shared across all artifact weapons, it's absolutely to potentially keep us playing longer. Every decision they've made in Legion has been based on what will result in our highest played, even if it comes at the cost of our experience and enjoyment of the game. I think this is true, but again, it comes back to the point I was saying. I think they overestimate how much stuff they need in the game to get us to do that. And I do think that there is a danger that it stops some people playing the game. It's a bit like, I remember there was a film called Scaramouche, years old film now, and there was a fencing instruction being given at one point in terms of how tightly to grip the sword, and he was describing it like the neck of a bird. And it's talking about, too loosely and your bird will fly away, too tightly and you'll choke it. And I think the same thing applies in a game like this. I think it's quite a delicate balance. If you don't have enough content in there, people will leave and spend more time playing other games. And maybe they'll get into those other games more and then stop playing WoW altogether. That's a danger. But equally, if you keep them chained to it too much to the point where it becomes a chore, it's not supposed to be a chore, it's a game, then people leave for that reason as well. And I think there is a very delicate balance to be had. And it's probably not an easy balance to make. But yeah, I don't think they, because the other downside is, with the AP one specifically, if you get to a point where a lot of people will think, I certainly feel like this, I'm sure a lot of other people do as well, that you're sort of thinking about building up AP on your other weapons. Some people probably just think there's no point, it's not worth it, that it's not worth the extra effort to do that. Because I know when, I talked about this in the video I did on the live Q&A, Ian has a cost of saying, if you spread your AP across 2 weapons, well, first of all, some people have, I know druids have 4, but no druid realistically, or very few druids are actually going to properly play 4 specs. But some people might want to keep up with 3 if they're pure DPS classes. So he was only talking about spreading across 2, never mind 3. But even across 2, he was describing it as, the difference between putting it all in 1 weapon and putting it across 2 is you might be 3 levels behind putting it across 2. And he said, well, that's not very much. Well, with the Netherlight Crucible, it is. Until you get to 75. 3 levels is another trait on your relic, on one of your relics, isn't it? How can you say that's not much? Especially if it's a really good one. So I think there is a situation at the moment where it's not really worthwhile putting it in, or some people will feel anyway, that it is not worthwhile keeping up with multiple ones. Or they'll just think to themselves, you know what, I'll wait for the artifact level to get to max, then I'll work on the other weapon. But in the meantime, if the other weapon belongs to a spec that's actually better for something, then you're making yourself less competitive for that as well. So I think, I don't think there's any necessity for this, because it isn't enough of a carrot. It's too much more like a stick than a carrot. And people at the end of the day, when it comes to a game, don't respond well to sticks, do they? But that's my opinion again, as everything is. So there we go. Those are the questions from this week. Keep them coming in for next week. And thanks for watching. If you've liked it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.